Hello, and thank you very much for this invitation. I'm really very pleased to have been given this opportunity to talk to you about research that we've been doing in the department into the NHS's psychological telephone therapy program. I'll say more about that in a moment. I'm going to focus really on aspects of language use in therapy sessions, which I think these aspects of language could be feed directly into work that you may be doing with your students if you're looking at language of the workplace setting. The workplace that we're looking at particularly is the NHS. So it's a medical workplace. Now, you wouldn't necessarily think, well, the NHS medicine is a workplace, but I just wanted to point out, this is my third bullet point here, that the NHS is a workplace. In fact, it's the biggest employer in Europe, and it's the world's largest employer of highly skilled professionals, 1.3 million in England alone, so that 1 in every 25 working age adults works in the NHS. So this is very, very definitely a workplace setting. And I'm going to be looking now at a very specialized form of medical setting. That is the NHS's delivery of what's called IAPT program, Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. This program, which was devised and introduced 13 years ago. This work is based on NIHR-funded research. NIHR is the National Institute for Health Research, which is the research arm of the NHS. In other words, this research is being done, in a sense, within the NHS. We've produced a number of publications, research publications, which are listed at the end and which you have access to. I've given with Annie Irvine. I did this work with Annie Irvine, and she and I have recorded a 10-minute talk, which gives you kind of background to both IAPT and to our project in more detail than I'm going to do today. So do if you have time, look at that. But in case you haven't had time to look at this before this afternoon, I just give you a very rapid overview. As I say, it was introduced 13 years ago to deliver psychological interventions within primary care. What that means is that people's GPs refer them to the IAPT program. And it's now the largest national program. This, I'd say, as far as we know across the world, this is the largest national program of mental health intervention, mental health care, and it reaches hundreds of thousands of patients a year. Broadly speaking, IAPT deals with common mental health problems of stress, anxiety, and depression. And I should say that the figures are rather out of date, that 1.1 million in 2018-19. Of course, under COVID, that number will have soared, because what used to be given as in-person, you could do IAPT either in-person meetings with a therapist or by telephone. And of course, all those in-person meetings have been stopped. So this is a talking therapy. That will turn out to be important. One of my last slides will be about the role of language and talk, conversation in medicine. But it's a talking therapy, and it's delivered through by telephone. The telephone interactions between patients and what are called personal well-being practitioners, PWPs. I'm going to try and refer to those as practitioners, but I may from time to time fall back into my NHS kind of habits of saying PWP. Forgive me if I do that, but I'm talking about the practitioners, the trained professionals who are delivering the program. The program itself, in terms of what actually happens, is very highly structured and standardized. This is to reach as wide a range of people as possible. It's a mass program, really, and in order for resources to be used efficiently. These are relatively highly structured. through using standardized protocols, and you'll come to see what I mean by that in a moment. On one side is the standardized protocol, the structured approach. On the other hand, the aim is to be flexible enough to deliver a tailored and personalized experience for patients. You know, patients have personal problems to talk about and want help with. And so the system has to be flexible enough to both be standardized, but at the same time personalized. And that will be, in a sense, the key theme of what I'm talking about and showing. That is the language of the PWPs and the patients, practitioners, I fall into it already. Language of practitioners and patients in a way both reflect the way in which practitioners are attempting to balance standardization with personalization. That balance is tricky. It's difficult to bring off. And one might say there's a tension between, of course, as you would expect, between standardization and personalization, a balance and a tension that NHS practitioners, including, of course, the PWPs, those practitioners, are very well aware of. They and their managers and the whole design of the system is very concerned about getting that balance right somehow. So our work is playing a role in trying to get that balance right, and our work is now being cited in the NHS and used in training. Our work, the work that Annie and I did, was based on recordings and analysis of real-life IAPT telephone sessions. We collected something like 200 sessions. And our method is conversation analysis, which I'm not going to say anything more about at this point in detail. That's for after if you are interested. I'm going to show some data, and I just want to give you a caution about these data. The caution, firstly, in terms of you're absolutely entitled to use this with these data with your students. We have permission to use them for publications, and all the data are already in the public domain. But nonetheless, and this is the real part of the caution, to please be aware that the problems that are discussed include things like bereavement, the loss of a child, eating disorders, and many others, and other. I mean, many patients will have experienced more than one of these. So, and they are distressing matters. And if you think you might be affected by any of these, do feel free to tune out of this section and return for the next talk. I'm going to work in this way. I want to show 4 short excerpts from IAPT telephone consultations. As I say, the principal theme is this one of how the talk is shaped by the structure and protocol, and how both practitioners and patients cope with that. Patients, of course, are there seeking opportunities to tell their story. They have problems that they want to talk about, and so their role in this, of course, is to tell their story. Be very clear that and our work does not make judgments about the effectiveness either of individual PWPs or the effectiveness of the service as a whole. We're only pointing to linguistic features of how each, the practitioners and patients, manage their roles and their work in these interactions. You'll see that I've highlighted the practitioner's talk in blue and patient's talk in yellow. And transcription symbols are available on the event website. Now I'm going to do something which I hope will work, which is now to move to a different, I'm going to abandon slides for the time being and show you data. These are the data excerpts. The points that I'm going to make are available. The slides actually continue It's just that I can't deal with both the slides and the data on the same screen at the same time. But we will find summaries, in some cases, a little bit more than what I'm able to say now on those slides. So do take this in conjunction with the slides that you have available to you. These sessions begin with patients being taken through what's called the Patient Health Questionnaire 9, PHQ 9, and a Generalized Anxiety Disorder, GAD 7 questionnaire. In other words, patients are given a questionnaire and they're asked to provide information in response to that, which will then be the basis for their assessing their state of health, their state of mental health. I've got a simple point to make on this first excerpt. That is that the language here, and I'm focusing entirely for the moment on the practitioner's language, the PWP's language. The language of the PWP is, as it were, scientific. It's the language of science and measurement. So right away in line 1. So first of all, this is the very first thing that a patient is asked. PHQ 9, that's the depression screening tool. So depression screening tool is very much a kind of measurement system, scientific measurement. And then the practitioner continues in line 6. Today, you scored 20 out of 27. That tells me that's in the severe category for depression. Scored 20 out of 27. The score is, of course, again, a measurement. So the patient is being measured. And that tells me is that that measure indicates, this is not about a kind of a view that we might have, a more qualitative view. It's that measure tells me you're in the severe category. And that's repeated in line 10, that tells me. That your anxiety is okay, it's below the threshold. Now, to be below the threshold, again, is the language of measurement. So the practitioner's language at this outset is very much one in which the patient is being, as it were, tutored into a scientific measuring kind of approach to assessing their problems. You might think, if you're working on this with students, and by all means do, you might think about how else, and that's exactly what we're doing actually, how else the practitioner might have explored the patient's problems. This is exploring the severity of the patient's problems, and there might be other ways of exploring those that you might think would work. The patient's role in this is really just to confirm, as in here in line 15, the practitioner asks, is that right? And the patient agrees yes. And then okie dokie is a rather, let's say, informal end to that. So you got a formal scientific measuring system section, and then this informal move on. Now a second case, and here I'm going to talk both about the practitioner's language, but also the patient's. First of all, the practitioner in lines 1 and 2 asks this question. So little interest or pleasure in doing things. How often were you experiencing that? Now, linguistically, that is a rather unusual construction. You wouldn't, in ordinary talk, and one's thinking about what are the differences between workplace language and the language of ordinary informal conversation, let's say. Well, in ordinary, if a friend was asking you about, how often do you feel you don't have pleasure in doing things, you might ask it in that way. But here, the syntax of the question is reversed. So little interest or pleasure in doing things, and then you get the question, how often we're experiencing that. That is what linguistically is known as a left cleft, or it moves the topic to a hanging topic left dislocation. You don't need the language, and it's there in the PowerPoint. But it's a dislocation in the sense that it's a left dislocation, because what would have come after is being dislocated to come before. What that tells you is that the PWP is reading from the protocol. That's to say, what she has in the protocol is so little interest or pleasure in doing things. And then the practitioner adds the how often we're experiencing that, which are from the instructions given before. Now, just to focus a little bit on the patient. The patient now has a question, but they have a personal problem. Well, they answer the question, first of all, in line 3, in quite often. That's an answer to the how often, quite often. But then the patient continues. And in continuing, the patient elaborates, because I'm one of those people that, and from there on, they give quite a vivid and elaborated account of their problem. So when I've highlighted this because I'm one of those people that is this patient's continuation into their story about their problem. There is something very interesting about because I'm one of those people that, which is that the patient categorizes themselves. That's to say, one of these people is a category of person. Very briefly, what that does is to make, by treating this as not just about me, but I am one of a number of people, a category, a type, then it makes the difficulty that they face more explicable, more understandable, more recognizable. One other thing here is, and you by all means do read these through more carefully afterwards, the patient says, I can't go out. This is an account for not being able to go out and see people. I can't go out is, of course, a constraint, an inability to do something. And that is what accounts are. We give accounts that are constraints. So it's not that I don't go out or I don't like to go out or anything of that kind. It's that I can't go out. And then finally, from the patient's point of view, here we have a paradox. I don't think they want me, but they do. That's a paradox. Paradox is widely used, and I've written about it in relation to suicide notes as well. It's very widely used when someone has difficulty explaining, difficulty putting things into words, exactly what's happening. They use a paradox as a way of trying to explain their problem. I'm going to move on to the third example. And here again, I'm just going to go through a couple of other questions with you, if that's all right. Yeah, that's fine. Lovely. And then the practitioner asks in line 5 and 6, do you have any children under the age of 18 at all? Now, notice the patient says, no, unfortunately not. Now, the unfortunately has implications. It's what we would think of in linguistics as having implicature. There's a story there. We don't know what the story is, but it's not, the patient doesn't say no, or no, I don't, or something simple like that. The unfortunately says there is something to be revealed about this. Maybe they've tried to have children and can't, but whatever it is. You'll see that it's in line 28, where the patient makes that explicit. We also lost a child. So it's first of all mentioned indirectly there in line 8 through the implicature. So the indirectness of that. Notice that the PWP in response, that response, okay, that's fine, refers to this as having the no as having been an answer to the question. No, I don't have children under the age of 18. It doesn't pick up on, unfortunately. Again, be clear, I'm not criticizing the PWP for this. That is the nature of a protocol, which they are required. Their performance review, requires them to do it in this way. But from the patient's point of view, they've indicated something implicitly that hasn't been picked up. And therefore, it's only in the elaboration of their story from line 28 on that they're able to then be more explicit about why they don't. And that indeed was the core of their trouble. Just a point on the PWP's language is that these are fairly minimal minimal acknowledgements. The yeah, okay, and so forth. Okay, and okay, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. Then moves on to a next topic. That's a kind of closure. Now, moving on to the fourth excerpt. Again here, have you been assessed by a psychologist or a psychiatrist in the past? The patient again answers that question. In each case, they answer the question, I've seen a psychologist. But then the patient takes the opportunity to add, to elaborate, to then begin to reveal their story. That their story is about their problem. I've seen a psychologist after my partner passed away. Okay, and what was the outcome? And again, we get the okay, the acknowledgement, and then what was the outcome really goes back to the answer, I've seen my psychologist, after I've seen a psychologist. So you get, now this is very different from ordinary language, ordinary conversation. In ordinary conversation, what you do is you respond to the last item first, and then go back to previous items before. So the first response would be to the partner passing away in ordinary talk, but not here, because this is driven by the protocol. This is then elaborated quite extensively here. And you see it once again, the practitioner's responses are relatively minimal acknowledgements. The final point I want to make is this in line 35. Line 35 does that same, okay, that's fine. We find these absolutely recurrently. That's the way of closing that section, that part of the questionnaire. And then the PWP goes on to say, we'll come back to those in a minute. There was another case, example 2, had exactly the same formulation. We'll come back to these in a minute, indicates that what the PWP is doing is to orient to the agenda. These are standardized sessions. They have standardized sections in the agenda, and this isn't the moment for talking about your problems. So we'll come back to that in a minute. And, are you taking any medication currently? That's moving on to the next question. Now, those are the observations that I have on, sorry, I've got myself tied up here, on the data. There are others, and you'll find other points in the PowerPoint. I want to just summarize, and you'll find the summary again on the PowerPoint, but to save the kind of the technical glitch that could occur if I try and move from the handout to the PowerPoint. Just to summarize, what I've done is to identify and highlight features of the language used by both PWPs and by patients in the work tasks of each. Each has a work task, but the practitioner has the task of delivering this protocol and of getting information from the patient, which will help to assess the severity of their difficulties. At the same time, the patient, of course, has a task, which is to tell the story. They have problems to talk about, and that is their task, their work task. And so I've identified features that relate to each. And of course, PWPs are constructing their language to administer the standardized protocol, and in response, patients are finding ways to, as it were, circumvent or break through the constraints of a protocol. So there's that tension. And again, this is not a criticism. This is the way that these are, and the PWPs do their very best to administer it in a let's say in a humane and personalized way. A final point. That is that language is the key. Notice that I haven't said anything about, I haven't said anything about psychology in this. You might have expected this to be about psychology. It's about language. And I just wanted this for you and your students. There is, I think, a current narrative about the humanities, including teaching of English and so forth, which is, I think, let's say it's devaluing what we do. But the current narrative appears not to recognize the practical application and utility of our understanding about the role of language in communication. I've done a lot of work in medicine, in neonatal intensive care, on medical records in the US and so forth. And all this work is about language in this way, and it is practically useful. That is, it makes a difference. And I think students should be aware of that.